welcome everybody. I'm so excited for today's live with my friend Carly. So you guys know the drill. I'm KyleneTerhune. I am an NLP coach, a functional medicine practitioner, and I now work with women recovering from sexual betrayal trauma because their husbands are recovering from sex or porn addiction. And Carly is a previous client and friend, and our relationship has just evolved over the years. And I thought it would be really cool to share kind of your experience as we worked through trauma together, because while your story is unique and maybe not the same as a lot of the women who are dealing with similar stories to mine, there are a lot of parallels, and also, I don't know how you feel about it, but when we talk about emotional processing and trauma work and subconscious reprogramming, in the beginning, if you haven't experienced it, you're like, what the heck are they talking about, right?
Yeah.
So today we'll kind of get into all of that. We'll share your story because it's been a story of just tremendous transformation. But Carly, why don't you introduce yourself with all of your new certification titles?
Hi, I'm Carly, and I am an FDNP, and I also have my NLP certification, the same ones that Kylie has, which is pretty cool. And we're going to go to level 2 together, which is even cooler. And a year ago, I was a teacher. Actually, just a few months ago, I was a teacher. So
yeah.
And yeah, what else? Okay, and let's see. I met Kylie. Well, I met Kylie a while ago, but like, should I start at like how we started working together?
Yeah, actually, so our it was a progression, right? Our progression involved Facebook stalking and and many years of kind of getting to know me online before trusting me with your body and your health.
And not understanding why I was taking so long too. Like that's the interesting part I think about my story, is that I didn't really understand that there was something more to understand about myself.
What do you mean by that?
So like when I first actually took the dive into actually working with you on my gut health, like I didn't know that I had sexual trauma in my past. And like I always wondered like certain things about myself, like why they were the way they were. And I know like you can go into like so many rabbit holes asking the why questions, but my brain. And so it was just interesting because first of all, I didn't know that you had gone through sexual betrayal trauma because that wasn't your platform at that time. I didn't know I had gone through it. And I just wanted to like be motivated and get out of bed.
Yeah. So you were kind of coming in for some of the physical ramifications of trauma and imbalances in your body. And you, at the time, were not associating them with the trauma connection of things that happened much earlier in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important because especially if women are dealing with this and maybe they do recognize it as a trauma, but they're like, I'm fine, right? A lot of times that's like the beginning, like, I don't know, 3 to 6 to 9 months of recovery. And when you have just experienced something really difficult, you know, you're in the stress mode and your body's super activated and your brain is super on and you're getting things done and you're in essentially survival mode, right? But, you know, when things aren't addressed, that have caused you pain and they're not addressed for long periods of time, and in your case, decades, they manifest in all sorts of different ways in your body, and they show up in ways that we really wouldn't expect. And for you were coming in with primarily at the beginning after 6 years of following me on social media. So we had a journey of, we did a group program, and then you worked with me one-on-one, and that even at the beginning of the one-on-one, it was supposed to be physically focused, but then we transitioned right into the emotional work too. So it was a progression even within our relationship.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because when I was unraveling like my trauma, it was because of the physical health side of things. And then I like wasn't telling anybody, and I didn't know to tell you because I didn't know that like you were my physical health coach. Like that's how I saw it. And I didn't know that the two things were related and that I needed to like mention, like, I didn't know that symptoms were symptoms at all. And it's just so weird looking back at it and being like, how did I not know? And then like you just said about you're like going through the like fight or flight mode and you're doing all the things and you have all this energy. I was proud of all the energy that I was having. So I was like not putting two and two together that, hey, look, all of a sudden I'm getting all these food intolerances. I'm having like a crap ton of anxiety but my energy's up. I like feel good somehow. I like, in my mind, I was feeling really good, even though I had so much anxiety at the same time. And I was doing all these things that were making me really proud of myself. But really what I was doing was like flying away from actually dealing with what was happening.
Okay, that's key. Talk about that. Because that is something I did want to touch on, because you are a perfect example. I'm so proud of you, because you are a really, really good example of desperately not wanting to face the pain, and also knowing that you need to, and literally convincing yourself, this is good for me. I need to do this, even though you really, I mean, nobody wants to, right? But you really had this kind of, when we started doing the trauma work, you really had this internal fight with yourself.
I still do when I'm doing the work. So yeah.
But so
but I have the evidence now in my brain.
Yeah,
sorry,
what made you willing to do it? I mean, even initially, because initially that was such a leap of faith for you to allow me to go from working on things like lab testing and nutrition with you, jumping into a deep, like, we're working in your subconscious brain, we're dealing with emotions and trauma. I mean, that's a big leap for you, to trust me with that. So, and especially when you have so much resistance and fear around it because of what you've experienced. So what made you willing to do that?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what made me willing to do it was the parallels between my journey and like, I don't know if I was like seeing what I needed to see to feel protected, but the fact that I chose to join the program when I chose to join it, like I recovered trauma memories when like you were already inserted into my life. I knew that you had like a childhood history that kind of I thought lined up with what was had happened to me. And then
Kitty goes, we're talking about hard stuff. I'm here to support
it was just, there was just so many parallels to like, this is what I'm dealing with. And like okay, like you're like, well, I've dealt with that. And then there's just certain signs that, let me just think for a second. I don't know, the fact that you were at the training for NLP, I remember like a few weeks before you went to that training, or at some point when I had realized that I had uncovered my like childhood trauma, and that it was just like circling in my head trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing with this information. And then I remember like maybe saying something to you along the lines of like, it was like really cryptic. And then I said something to like, I don't know, at this point, it might have been my physical health. I said something to like, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, I know you're not psychic, but I wouldn't be surprised if you're working on that certification. And you were also doing the trauma, like a trauma program with, like not the NLP.
Yeah.
And then you had gone to the NLP training, and it just seemed like this was my window of opportunity. And if I didn't take it, I was going to miss it, because I had built up this relationship with you. And then I was also going to be going on a trip, and I was starting to like really uncover why the trip was making me so anxious. And I was like, I just need to do this before I go on that trip. That was like
that was the travel anxiety. And if you're ready to talk a little bit about your story, we can dive into that piece of it, because I think the trip really exemplified how it was manifesting in your life in some ways. So like I mentioned earlier, Carly, it's not spousal betrayal, but she has experienced betrayal from people in her life. And in some ways, actually, I would think both of the main ones were sexual in nature. And that manifested later in a lot of different ways. I think it manifested with the way your brain views and perceives the world and functions. It manifested in physical health imbalances over the decades, and it manifested in extreme anxiety around specific events.
And around physical touch.
And then that's huge too. And that's something I think that a lot of women here may be able to relate to, because when we are traumatized and betrayed, in a sexual nature of any kind, that can really manifest in lack of trust of other people, but then also like this almost like a lack of trust of self. Like, is
Hmm.
pleasure okay? Do I feel safe in my body? Do I feel pretty in my body? Do I feel like okay in my body? And that's all super, super normal, even when like the trauma or the experience itself is different. A lot of them can have those same components.
It's really interesting to, at least to me, as somebody who didn't know that I had a traumatic childhood, or at least traumatic incidences within my childhood, to sort of realize that like something traumatic happened to me, and um like my brain repressed it for so long, and then just like recovering the memory, and then realizing how it's manifested. Like there was validation to the way that I respond to certain things, but then there was also, it was almost like first being traumatized when I
Yeah.
realized I had trauma in my past.
I kind of forgot about that, that we actually, you would share a little bit of what was going on, and I would say, no, that is a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of forgot about that whole process. So I'm like, well, how do you not know that's a trauma, Carly? Like everybody knows
Because
it.
I was a kid at the time, so like I didn't
Right.
know. I thought something was wrong with me, that I thought that like I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so share as much or as little as you want about like the two main experiences. If you don't, you can go into as much or little detail as you want to just give people an idea of what happened.
Okay, so basically the first is my was my pediatrician. So every time I go to the doctor, like he would touch me inappropriately. And I was like, he was my doctor from probably birth until I finally like asked my mom. I asked my mom for like a female doctor when I was like maybe 11 or 12. Um, so yeah, I just thought I felt uncomfortable because he was a male and I was a female.
Mm.
And then uh my next trauma, I don't know if it's a trauma, it was a trauma, was my high school
Was no
teacher.
quotations, no
Yeah,
quotations.
my high school teacher, he was more than a teacher to me. He was like a mentor for me. I had him 2 years, but they weren't in a row. They were spaced out. So I had like this 3 year relationship with him where he just like, it was the first time that I felt like smart, and I felt that I stood out as a student. And I went from getting C's in English to getting A's in English to like defining myself as a writer because of the way he saw me.
Mhm.
And then the last day of school, I like wrote him like a letter of appreciation, and one thing led to another, and we ended up kissing on the lips. So
No, 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 Carly, Carly,
he
Carly.
kissed me on the lips.
Thank you. Okay, because we have to make sure you like we you when we process this was not you at all, and
Mm-hmm.
there was no misconduct on your part. You were expressing, and I want to make sure you don't take
Yeah.
any responsibility for this or express when you're sharing your story any responsibility for this, because he was your mentor. He was an adult, and you were saying you've inspired me to be a teacher, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and he really abused that relationship in that moment, and for you that really set you back. I mean,
Oh
I
yeah.
when you were so this isn't something that you were participatory in. I remember you telling me like how shocked you were.
Yeah, that one, like that I repressed like within days of it happening, which was also really interesting.
Mm,
So um yeah, that was like
yeah,
extremely shocking. He was like, I didn't even have any type of like sexual, like it was not a sexual relationship at all. There was
right.
no signs. I was super innocent in high school, and I
Ah,
just like, my parents were going through a divorce, and my brother had just come out of the closet, and 9/11 had just happened, and like I was just had like, he was like a father protector figure to me.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing is these are both um, examples of people in your life that you were supposed to trust. You were supposed
Hmm.
to like naturally be able to trust these people in your life, and your teacher even more so because you had a relationship with this person over time that was really a mentor and an inspiration and kind of like, hey, I want to become you to some extent because he
Yeah.
really inspired you to teach, right, and gave you self-confidence in that area and everything. And so I think that parallel even is so similar to, this is someone in your life that you feel like you should be able to trust, that you know this person, and within the confines of the high school and teacher student relationship, you should have felt safe, and he did up until the point that he abused that, and that is such a shock, very similar to what we would feel when we find something out about this person that we're living with, right? And it's like, okay, I didn't know that that was who you were, and that's not cool. And it's very similar in the fact that as a high school student, that is not your fault in any way, shape, or form. Like, you did nothing to provoke that, and none of it is on you. So talking about how this manifested later in life, you went on this trip, and we had this was very early on in the part of our relationship where we were working on trauma and emotions. We had, I don't know the timeline exactly, but we had just started fairly early in that process. And then you were going to go on this trip, and it was causing massive amounts of anxiety because it was another practitioner.
I was going to a dentist, a trip to a dentist.
And so those types of situations were scary for you.
It was also interesting too, because so we started working in the group program in January. I believe I made the connection with the trauma to my doctor maybe in February, and then I just was like, I need to go get my blood labs drawn in. I did that in March because that's when I was on spring break at the time, and I just my initial reaction to realizing that what was going on with my doctor, explaining why I hadn't been to a doctor since I was in my early 20s, so a long time. And there was this initial oh, that's why I don't feel comfortable going to doctors. Okay. And then I almost felt very empowered by it. And I just went and got the blood labs done. And then it's there's these little moments where it sneaks up on me, as I'm driving to the lab. And the day that I went to get the labs done, she was explaining to me that we couldn't do the labs that day because I was asking for extra labs and the doctor needed to approve it. And I got so triggered in that moment, and I didn't really understand. I still didn't understand why. I didn't understand the whole trigger being a trauma response and all of that stuff. And it's just interesting too, because we were doing the work on going to the dentist, and I didn't even make the connection of the dentist is the one that is making me feel unsafe. It's not the travel. It's not being out of my comfort zone. It's actually the dentist that I've never met before. And so we had done work in one session, and I left feeling really super confident. And then so that got cleared. And then all of a sudden I was flooded with even more anxiety than I had been with for the trip, because once we took that layer of the travel nervousness off, and some of the habits that I had formed at the time off, then I was left with the realization and the actualization, I'm going to be sitting in a dentist chair the whole time I'm in this trip. And then
we took the layer, and it was boom, here's the root.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah. I remember you even saying you felt fine when you left my session. What's happening? And then that's when I was I don't know what's happening. Oh, it's picturing myself sitting in the dentist chair.
Yeah. And then we did a lot of work on that. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. So let's maybe talk about, what does that mean? So what were some of your doubts or insecurities or fears around maybe doing trauma work? And then what was it like for you going through this experience of dealing with these emotions and these traumas?
I think some of the fears, which is I still kind of am working through, is realizing that I had gaslighted myself for so long. So with the doctor, I had, that memory wasn't necessarily repressed, but the truth of what was actually happening, I never really allowed myself to actualize. And so there was I was gaslighting myself, and that didn't actually happen. That's in your head. That is normal. That's what's supposed to happen. And then with my teacher, I literally repressed it. I didn't remember any of it happening. And that I recovered accidentally by reading a journal that I had written in, maybe also about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So some of the fears was I've kept this in for so long. what's going to happen when I let it out? I didn't believe myself. I don't trust myself. How do I expect somebody else to?
Right.
And then like, what was actually going to happen once I told somebody? Was it going to even matter to them? Are they going to realize, like, to me, I still struggle with comparing my trauma to other people's traumas, and it's not like as big or as bad as, I mean, my doctor molested me for like 11 years. That's pretty bad. And so I don't know, it's like this fear that other people just aren't going to understand the way that I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And kind of, I don't really need other people to, but it definitely feels better when other people are in it with you.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think so many women listening to this can relate to that. Oh my gosh, I like do that. I still do that. Like with some of my stuff, you know. From childhood, it's like really hard for me to say, "Oh, like that was I don't know what word to use for it. Was it molestation? Was it abuse? Like, I don't know. It was not cool."
It's being molested and it's an abuse of power. So it's really both of those two things. And then it's like a violation of your trust, a violation of your body, a violation of your mind.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, my body was violated when I was 8. Yeah, there's so many things. But then, like you said, like, you know, I'll look at what happened to me and compare it to, you know, something like you, for example, and go, oh, no comparison, no comparison. You know, so but that doesn't invalidate how your brain processed it. It doesn't invalidate how it manifested later in my life, like over time, as I was, you know, as your brain develops and it starts to understand what these are, that manifests in a lot of different ways. And for women that are going through this now, they experience that a lot in terms of comparing either the betrayal or the recovery with other women. So like, well, you know, this woman over here, her husband went to prostitutes. This woman over here, you know, my husband just looked at still pictures of pornography. The trauma can be the same in both of them, or, you know, anything in the middle of that, in that spectrum, right? The trauma can be the same. It's dependent on your relationship and who you are and how shocked you are and what life you thought you were living, right? And your values and your beliefs and the communication that you had as a couple and the lies and the manipulation. And so I think everyone does that to some extent when it's like it's hard to say the words, I have been traumatized, or this was a trauma that was put upon me. Sometimes it's hard for women to say, like, to really embrace the idea that I had nothing to do with this.
Yeah,
Not your fault.
And it's also interesting because I keep feeling the need to say, like, well, I just recovered this memory. Like, it's going to make a difference in my story for people to understand that even though this huge trauma happened so many years ago, it's still so fresh in my mind because I just recovered it. And like, I don't need that to be a part of my story, but for whatever reason, I always add it in to the few people I've spoken to about it.
Well, I think that's an important thing to share too, because everyone's story is going to be a little bit different. And as you go through recovery for one thing, other stuff may come up. And that's the cool thing that we've learned about the brain, right? It's only going to bring up memories like that when it's ready to process them. When it's ready and it feels safe and you have the tools, then it's going to bring that up, which is what happens, you know, in these sessions that we do where we say, hey, take us back to, you know, this first event where this emotion or this belief about myself was created in my body. You don't know what's going to come up, but you can rest in the fact, if you're willing to trust your body and your practitioner, you can rest in the fact that your brain is only going to bring up what it feels safe to process and allow you to do that through the exercise. And what your brain was doing up to that point was protecting you because it wasn't ready. You know,
and it's interesting too with my teacher, because I always go back to that, where the only reason my brain wasn't ready to recover that memory when it recovered it. It recovered it through, literally, it was 3 words that I wrote in a journal page. It was my teacher's name kissed me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it was like scrawled on like a typical, like, otherwise very like, so and so is talking to so and so, and
like a very high school entry, and then boom.
And then it's like boom. So I still kind of play that in my mind, like, oh, my brain wasn't ready to recover that memory. And so it's just interesting. I always wonder how that changed the way that I internalized.
Well, you know, for me, you know, with my spiritual beliefs, I go, that happened when it was supposed to happen,
Mm.
even if there were external things kind of allowing that to happen, because you were in the place that you could then process that. That
Mm.
was the time when you're like, had that happened 5 years ago, what would you have done with it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you were already in this place of working through all of this to some extent or another. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it worked out, but I hear what you're saying in terms of your brain. What I was mentioning is your subconscious is only going to bring things up when it's ready. What you're saying is you stumbled on this externally. And
Yeah, but I guess it's similar to you reading a text message, you know, or like noticing or what was it that the bills,
right.
like that was, but I guess your brain was ready to interpret what it needed to interpret from it and connect the dots.
Oh, and I've thought about the timing too of had I gone through discovery even a year prior.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a lot of providence in timing for sure, for sure.
Yeah, that goes
So
back to the original question of like how did I know I was ready to talk about it, to deal with it? Like
yeah,
all these people just keep getting planted into my life that know how to talk to me about it.
yeah, yeah. You needed to have that support system to feel safe talking about it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about the exercises, about the experience of working together, about dealing with the trauma and doing all of this work, because I think tell me if I'm wrong, but from the outside, it sounds very woo. And
Oh yeah.
so what were some of the highlights for you, or the big takeaways, or like even just if you want to share, like what was the experience like?
Hmm. I think it's part of it's really interesting because how much did so like okay, so I don't know how to segue into it.
That's all right. Take a minute to think about it. I mean, we didn't prep these questions, so you have plenty
Yeah.
of time.
Um hmm.
I mean, maybe talk about the experience of like timeline therapy, for example.
Oh, okay.
Like what that's like for you.
So it's what's really interesting with timeline therapy is my body gets extremely anxious when I'm about to go into it. And that's something that I've just discovered, like figured out. But at the same time, I love what happens when like when I'm done with it, the like few days in between sessions where I like I feel like discombobulated almost or like tired or I don't know what other people
Your brain's
experience.
processing
I
and
literally experience like physical sensations in my brain. And
I did
then
too. After the week,
yeah. Oh yeah.
after the original week, literally it was like 2 days. It felt like my brain was going like this, like connecting all the synapses and the
Yeah.
neurons, and like it just felt like both sides of my brain were trying to like figure it
After the
out.
week-long training, it took me, I mean, that's a whole nother story, but that took me
Yeah.
like 3 to 4 weeks to finally
Yeah.
feel back in alignment with. But the initial sessions, I remember being really, really tired after. Like I had just been sleeping or working out for like an extended period of time. I felt really tired. And I think some of the coolest things that happen afterwards is you just start hearing yourself say things out of your mouth that you're like, who said that? Like, where did that come from? Because your personality just kind of starts shifting for the better in such a first it's kind of like subtle, but then there's also these moments of like, whoa. Like I remember on one call saying to you, you were asking me about my supplements, and I just remember because it was such a contrast to how I would normally talk to you. And you asked me about my supplements and like one specific one. And I remember saying to you, like, I don't actually like taking that. And you were like, I thought you loved it. And I was like, sometimes I just tell people what they want to hear. And I was like, who just said that? Like,
Yes. Okay, so that's really important too, because it's something, you really were stepping into your authentic self through this process.
mm-hmm.
And that is one of the biggest things I hope for every single client that I work with, right? That you become more of who you are, and you feel safer expressing yourself, and you feel empowered in speaking your voice.
You know, in fact, this is what's also interesting is I don't usually remember what the limiting decision is that I come in with it, but I usually write down what the new belief is just so I can like rehearse it in my mind. Um, and you don't even need to know either of them, which is what's really interesting for the personality shift to happen. But I just really remember like one of the very first ones we worked on was this feeling that I had of like being kind of like stuck, which I like literally had the auditory memory as well of being in doing one of the big six for fear with my doctor. And you said something to me at some point, like, okay, can you like get off the table and like go somewhere? And it came out of my mouth. This is another one of those like moments for me. And it came out of my mouth, and it was like the first time I actually think I said it out loud, where I just said, I'm stuck. And like I wasn't, it was like my way of asking for help.
Yeah.
And I knew I've been stuck. Like I knew like these words have been needing to come out of my mouth, but just so clearly. And it seems so like, well, those words are, I'm stuck. Like that's not a hard thing to say, but it was for me at the time. And in the visual, what do you even call that when you're like back in time? In the memory.
Yeah. In the event.
In the event, visualizing it and trying to re-experience it, I physically felt stuck in the moment. Like I had nothing, I couldn't move, I just couldn't do anything. And to actually be able to say to you out loud, like, I'm stuck, and then you kind of being able to like swoop in with, well, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And just, it's cool because I can think back to that like memory now and like hear me saying that I'm stuck, which slightly empowers me rather than saying like, oh, I'm stuck. It's like, well, that was the moment I got to say it out loud. And then hearing my options and my choices, it lets me pause and slow down and like re-evaluate. Like the charge isn't really there anymore. And then also,
that's big. Huge.
Yeah. And then also, like, because I kept coming back to this, like, I'm stuck. I don't know. It's just weird to me how you like install options for your clients when you're not necessarily like, that doesn't have to be a limiting decision. Like, I don't have choices. I don't have options, but like a natural process of doing the timeline therapy is coming out of it, realizing that you have these options and you have these choices. So, okay, I'm stuck. I can't move, but is there somebody who can move me? Is there something I can do to push something away from me? And then like, I came out of it with like realizing like I can speak up, I can say this, this, and this. And if my voice isn't working at the moment, because I do have that like fear of not being able to get the words out, because that has happened to me for like 20 years, 30 years, that there's other choices and there's other options and that I'm not actually stuck.
Right. Yeah. So what do you were talking about the charge of the memory changing, the charge of the event changing. And that's one of the biggest things with this QTT, with timeline therapy, is we're not when we process trauma, we're not going to forget the memory, but we're processing it in a way where we take anything that we need that's positive from it, and we diminish the emotional charge associated with it. So now if we do remember it, it's not going to be the super it shouldn't be the super big trigger. And so are there some ways that that manifested for you as we continue to process all of this, in terms of changing how you feel about that or view it, or like experience it in your body?
Well, originally when I would just even like start to think about it, my whole body would get flooded with anxiety, and like it was like a state of like my whole physiological being just shifted. It was like being in a state of trigger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now it's more of a thought, or?
Yeah, it's more of a thought. It still kind of like comes up more than I'd like it to, but I'm able to tell myself now if it's coming up, there's like, what can I learn from this? Like, or we actually did an exercise. I don't even know if you remember, but we turned, like, I visualized it as like a little picture, and then I turned the picture over. And so I'm able to do like, I can turn the picture back over. And it really is interesting how quickly I'm able to choose to let the thought pass, right, or to choose to look around the thought, the memory. I did an exercise with a different practitioner. I don't know if I say her name or not, but like where I literally like burned the building down that he was in and like practicing in. So I can also be like, wait, no, I like burned the building down, and I can like replay me burning it down. And it's kind of like,
Yeah. And that's the thing, is those are tools and techniques that you can do in the moment that you can actually pull out later.
Yeah, actually. And then also I had gone back. So I go back to this memory a lot because there's a lot to process.
Well, no, there's a lot. So when something has been, whether it was acute and impacted you on like 20 levels deep, or it was acute, or 30 years ago, or it was something for you, which was chronic, there are multiple layers to processing something. So while one exercise can be tremendously helpful and release and all this kind of stuff, it may need to be revisited sometimes. It can be a layer for some people. And like with women with betrayal trauma and sexual betrayal trauma, it's like, okay, well, maybe you probably are experiencing this too, where it's like where you process something with one part, that doesn't mean all of your parts have processed.
Oh yeah, I've experienced that recently with a parts integration where, okay, like now I'm not fighting this part anymore. Now I'm struggling against this part. Like this part's like, hey, I'm here too.
Yeah. You had said something about your personality shifting, and I pulled up my notes from a Joe Dispenza talk, and I thought this was so applicable because if people hear, oh my gosh, her personality changed, like what does that mean? So this is a really good explanation of that. Your emotions are not who you are. Your personality isn't who you are. Your personality is memorized emotions. So what we're doing with all this work is we're processing the emotions that are no longer serving us. Because, and we were just talking about parts work, which we haven't even hit on in this conversation yet, but all of the parts of you, and anxiety is a part of you, they are all there for specific reasons. They want to help you. They have your best interest at mind. They want you to heal. They want you to become whole. And they show up at certain points in your life for a specific reason to accomplish a specific goal. And they do that very, very well, whether it's to protect you from something or, whatever it is. And later on in life, typically when we become aware of them where it's no longer serving us, then we can go in and say, hey, thank you for doing this, and I no longer need you. And, that shifts how you view the world. It shifts your filter. It shifts your emotional response to things. It shifts how your nervous system responds to things. It shifts how safe you feel. Those things really make a big impact. And so, yeah, your personality changes because you're dealing with these emotions that used to be coming out in how you viewed the world, and now they're not anymore.
Well, and sometimes it's like you're uncovering a different layer. And so it almost feels kind of like temporarily like, oh, like now I'm like more vulnerable. I don't want to be more vulnerable. And I've just like realized like that's like my cue that there's something deeper down here that I'm getting to. And it's like, that's exciting now rather than being like, oh, good, I'm crying. Like, that's exciting. I cried like so much in a session of like the other week, and I like came out of it and I was like, oh, that's embarrassing. And then I was like, wait, no, that was like exciting. I wanted to be crying. Like I've been like needing to cry, and I was like so grateful that I was crying.
Yeah, you're pulling off all of the layers of vulnerability or all the layers of protection and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And that is really where healing occurs. So let me say, is there one thing throughout the time that we had worked together, is there like one thing that stands out in particular? Or, you kind of had a lot of like moments, right? Where we were like, oh my gosh, that's a big thing. Oh my gosh, that's like, but was there anything specific that you feel like is like a big one moment that you want to share?
There's a lot.
I know.
Probably the realization that I don't want to be a teacher anymore.
Oh, that was huge. Yeah.
Oh, actually, so I don't remember which session it was, but there was a session where, so we like go in, we do the work in a memory, and then what you do after the memory is like you make your, right. Okay, so you go into a session with a limiting decision about yourself, right? It might be something like I'm not worthy, or I'm stuck, or I will always be the person who can't speak up for themselves, something like that. And so you go back to a memory where you decided, like you as a child made that decision, and you process that memory. And then what you do is you like re-watch future events change if you hadn't made that decision to begin with. So we did that. I honestly don't remember what the session was for, but I remember then doing like a future pacing. So like we tested like watching your future unravel.
Seeing how it's different, you process that.
And that's when I like imagined myself being an FDN. And like it was just I remember getting emotional about it, and I was like, I don't know why I'm crying. And you had said something like, well, sometimes it's like really powerful to realize that had something not happened, like your whole future could be different. Or I don't know, I just got so emotional about it. And then I'm an FDN now, so
I know you have manifested so much. Oh my gosh.
that was like in August too, probably, or like July. It's just crazy.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that really quickly because I really want one of the takeaways to be that when you're willing to face the pain and do the work, that you essentially can step into whatever version of yourself you want and whatever life you want to live. You can create that for yourself.
I'm literally doing that right now by talking to you live about my experience. Like
I
that's
know.
me purposely I consciously made the choice that in order to keep growing and expanding along the trajectory that I've created for myself, I need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so when an opportunity arises to do something uncomfortable with somebody, especially that I'm comfortable with, like I'm going to take the opportunity. And now I got excited instead of anxious, which was really, 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 really cool.
I know, and look how well it went. You did such a great job. So, what are the biggest shifts from, the day we started working together to now? I mean, there's so many. I mean, I view you as like a totally different person, honestly. Like, I think you've formed and you went from a caterpillar into just like this butterfly. And that doesn't mean that our journeys are done. Like, you and I are still on journeys of, trying to work on ourselves, trying to process things, trying to constantly grow. But the work that you have done in 1 year is like mind blowing. So like, what are some of the big hitters for you?
Like what made me successful or what I noticed about myself, or
like, what are the biggest transitions that you've noticed from one to the other, from the beginning to now?
The biggest transition is that I seek and create opportunities for myself. And I tend to, at least I used to, maybe, I don't know if this is like, I'm still integrating all these parts, but I like will see the big picture. Like, let's say the big picture is being an FDN. I would see that big picture and my old self would be like, well, that's impossible. I have no idea how to get there. And I just wouldn't even try. And now I'm like the person who's like, well, what's just like one thing I need to do to like get closer? What's one thing I need to do to get closer? What's one thing I need to do to get closer? And so like today's big thing was like just post something on Instagram. Like if that's all I did today, like I did one little thing to get closer to like getting a client or so I can move now. So I'm not stuck anymore. And on the flip end of that is also I'm taking baby steps, but at the same time I'm taking big steps. So to me, this is a big step. That's like coming and talking to like live without ever like it being on my, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you've taken huge steps, and you went from being a teacher to being an FDN. You went from you've even shifted medications. You've dramatically shifted your brain health.
Well, that was a big moment too, actually, was because I was trying, one of my original goals was I take Adderall because I have ADHD. And so one of my goals was to come off of that. And so I was trying really hard to come off of that over the summer. And I was like, almost like, I was like in a shame spiral every day with myself about it, about like, do I take it? Do I not take it? I want to take it. I don't want to take it. And then all of a sudden at one point, I just there was just, I don't know what our sessions were that led up to the moment, but it was just I made that decision from like an older perspective.
How old are you?
Yeah, that I wanted to come off of it. Why did I originally want to come off it? I originally wanted to come off of it because I didn't want to have to rely on doctors to fill the prescription, and because I like had shame around taking it. And then somewhere along the lines, like a different version of me also wanted to come off of it because I don't like what's in it, which is a whole nother thing. But then over the summer, I just had this like epiphany moment of like, wait, that was the old me who set that goal. And like the new me knows that like, I'm not gonna like, this is not worth torturing myself. I like the way that I feel when I take it. And I'm dealing with all this other trauma and life changes. And now's not the time to start continue messing around with it.
And combining that, like, this is a choice. And I do think you shifted doses, didn't you? I think you did.
Yes.
And stuff. So, I mean, basically what you were doing is like, I get to be in control of this. I get to say yes, or I get to say no. I get to be choosing this. And
Mm-hmm.
right now, this is serving me, and I'm going to be okay with this choice.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's definitely what it is the fact that I was able to just make the decision. Like, I'm just going to keep
Yeah.
taking this.
Yeah. So, what would you say to anyone that I mean, let's get like super honest. Financial investment in your health is hard sometimes. So, if somebody is saying, "Man, this sounds great. I want to process my triggers. I want to deal with my trauma. I want to release emotions. I want to become a better version of myself. I want to create a new identity and become authentic," and like, "Oh, this sounds great, right?" But the financial investment is, like
Yeah.
money. And so like that gets weird, right? Talking to people about money, and it gets scary too to think about spending money if you on your own healing when you're not sure what the outcome is, right? So like what would you say someone who has bravely invested in yourself consistently over the past year in multiple different avenues to grow, what would you say to someone that's nervous about doing something like that?
Um, what's like worth more of an investment, an iPad or you? I mean, like it's really just a mindset shift because the money is getting spent somewhere. So shouldn't I choose to spend it on myself? And what's the point of having the money in the bank if I'm not having the energy or the like I don't know, once you unlock yourself, you unlock everything. So how are
Your
you going to
ability
unlock
then to
yourself without investing in yourself?
your ability then to accomplish different things and do different things in life, and it kind of pays itself off, I feel like, in that
Oh,
area.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, right now I'm sitting in like the scariest spot because I'm still investing money in myself and I just switched careers. I don't have an income source. So luckily I've had the collection of evidence now that things will work out for me. It's very scary though, like waiting
Yeah.
for them to work
Changing
out for
your life
me.
is scary.
Oh yeah. Well, it's
Changing your
like,
life is scary.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
But
totally.
without the investments, I wouldn't be able to continue doing what I'm doing. So like right now I'm investing in learning how to do my job or learning how to live my life. And if I wasn't investing in that, then I wouldn't be moving. I'd be continuing to be stuck. And so
I mean, I do think ultimately that's what it boils down to, right? Is when we are not happy with where we are in life, there are two options. We can stay there, which we're obviously unhappy with, or we can pursue this healing in another way. And those
mhm.
and both are uncomfortable, and that's the reality of it.
I have
Both
to say
is
part of the like investing the money is discomforting. And because it's so much money, that's why I went so in. Like I was getting my money's worth. I was texting
yeah.
you like I was like I'm to me, and it's funny when I like think about how much money my initial um spending was because it was I went from zero to all in on
Right.
me. The group program felt all into me as
Yeah.
somebody who hasn't spent money on themselves to like, and then I just kept like up leveling that.
I know now you keep doing it, and I'm like, oh wow, girl, like you immediately learned the power of it. You
Mm-hmm.
experimented with it in one way, got the benefit from it, and said, well, if this can help me, what can this do? And if this can help me, what can this do? And if this can help me, what can this do? And that what you're saying about gathering evidence, it kind of proves to yourself as you make the changes. But I do think there's something to what you're saying of you felt very invested at a certain point where you were like, if I'm spending money on myself, I'm going to get out of it what I need. I think
And it's
that's
funny too, because I would even say to like one of my friends, like blah 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 blah, and they're like, "Well, why don't you like message your coaches?" And I was like, they're like, "You're paying like we're teachers. Like the amount that I was paying for that program just seemed like insane." And be like, "Well, you're paying like X amount of dollars for it. Like text them. Text. That's what they're there for. That's what
right.
you're paying
Yeah,
for."
yeah, exactly.
So I
Yeah,
wasn't used to that either. Like literally learning how to communicate was something that I got out of the program as well. Learning
yeah,
to advocate for myself, learning like if I don't feel well and there's somebody that I can ask about it, like it's on them if they're finding me annoying. Like,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which you're not annoying. I love you.
Yeah.
And then also, what would you say if somebody is, I was nervous about this before I got involved in it. What would you say to somebody that is nervous about the idea of working with their subconscious?
Um, your subconscious, you're in enough of an aware state of awareness that you can you're choosing, like you're choosing what memories you're reprocessing, you're choosing where you want to take your mind. And like I was, I mean, you could just choose not to do it, but then you're not going to get any results out of it, really. So you just have to trust that you're, and I mean, it's hard when you've been betrayed because you do start losing trust in yourself, but you just have to trust that there's still a part of you that trusts the process and knows what it's doing. And like, you like really could get up and leave like anytime that you're on, and most of the time you're on the phone, like the computer, like just shut the laptop if you're that uncomfortable with it. But
No, please don't do that. We don't want to
no,
stop
don't
in
do
the
that.
middle of
Don't get
tea.
stuck. Then you'll
No.
really get stuck. But yeah, I don't know.
Really
I don't know how to explain it. It's kind of just like you are not, it's not like you're being hypnotized to the point where somebody else is able to control what you're doing. You are really just unlocking a layer of yourself, and it's like when you're finally able to communicate with yourself. And that's what's like almost addicting about doing it, is that you get into this place where I can have somebody else help me to communicate with myself, and it's so quick, it's so fast, and your own like deep truth desires that you weren't even willing to admit to yourself start coming out, and that makes it all worth it. And you have to dig deep to get to the bottom, like so yeah, I just love that part of it.
Yeah, that's super cool. I think it's being willing to trust the real you.
Yeah.
And being willing to hear what the real you has to say.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's life changing.
Yeah. And it's like startling. I didn't know I didn't want to be a teacher, but I really didn't want to be a teacher anymore.
Yeah. But, you know, I think you're going to take all your teacher education and your
Oh,
giftedness.
yeah.
I'm already seeing it show up in your other
Thanks.
work. You're so gifted in so many ways. And I think all of that is showing up in what you're doing now. So it's just been super cool to watch your journey and experience it. And so anything else that you feel like you would want to leave as a message or a last comment to anybody listening?
I know. I think one of the coolest parts too is like you can bring resources into the memories. So then when you go back into the memories, you like I keep getting nervous to go back into my traumas, and then the first time I went back there, after the first time we went back there, was really interesting because I was there so short, because all I really did was look around and be like, oh, I have resources here. And that's all I'm going to get like emotional. That is like all my subconscious needed to know, is like when I'm ready to come back here to go into the deeper work, my resources are here. Mm-hmm. And then I was able to like even take like some of the resource with me because I needed it in the here and now during the time that I went back there. So that was cool.
If you had to say, like, scale of 1 to 10, where your self-trust started and where it is now, what would you say?
My honest, I'd say I started at like a 0 or 1, and I'm probably at like a 7 or 8.
Amazing.
And there are days where I'm at a 10 or 11, but
sure. What about just self-confidence in general, in like who you are, where you're going?
My confidence in where I'm going is a 10, but in the everyday living it gets shaken up.
Sure. Yeah. Where did it start, you before you started doing all this?
So that's what's so interesting, is because you don't know that you were like, it's okay. So I was going to say like my starting point was when I uncovered the traumas.
Okay.
So I was at a 0 at that point. I wasn't trusting anyone. I wasn't trusting anything at all. And I'm still definitely not at that 10 yet, but I know that I will be. Yeah. And that's the difference.
Oh no, thank you for being honest, because I think that's what we need. We need people to be honest, and we're all working towards that, right? I don't know anyone that's ever going to live every day at a self-confidence level of a 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But when we've been betrayed and our confidence in ourselves and our bodies and all this kind of stuff and other people has been destroyed, to be able to do this work and progressively get better, I mean, that's the goal, right? Is for the rest of our lives to constantly feel like we're progressing and we are knowing ourselves and we are living in integrity and we have the confidence to speak our voice and defend ourselves and share our thoughts and ideas and emotions and make choices that work for us based on what our goals are.
And it's interesting too, because as you're saying that, my brain is like still processing, but it's like I might not be at a 10 with trusting myself.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Like just, I trust myself 10 out of 10. I cannot say that, but I can say 10 out of 10. I trust that I can trust myself to get myself there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're going to make all the choices exactly as you have been to face the discomfort to get where you need to go.
Yes. And I'm a 10 out of 10 on that.
10 out of 10. I think that's a good
Yes.
place. 10 out of 10, Carly. Congratulations. All right. I know this was a big first step for you. This was nerve-wracking for you. You were so brave. It has been an honor and a pleasure not only to work with you, but to be friends now and now to be colleagues. I can't wait to see you in February. And just thanks for being willing to share your story and your experience working with me and experiencing all of the stuff that we've done together and all the exercises.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you for everything. You're amazing.